Hello, and welcome to part 3 in this series of me rambling and not knowing how to talk to people. Last episode we talked about if-else statements and a few other things, and switch cases too. But in this episode, let's go over the assignment, and then this episode will be for loops, while loops, and do while loops. You don't really use those, but let's go over the assignment for last time. So let's see here. These are all the answers. You can just, yes. Like, stock talk. I need to start talking. Weird, awkward silences don't work very well. I mentioned this last time. You don't need to do this ever. Is Boolean equals true? You can just do is Boolean. It's a lot nicer, and it just looks better. I mean, even like my computer science teacher hates it so much that he actually took off points if you did that. So, but I mean, for things like this, then you have to. But is Boolean, it is a Boolean, so you don't really have to worry about that. Oh, and then this part, I believe this was included in the question just for you. You had to type it, fun stuff. This int out in front is called a cast. And basically what a cast does, it means that, okay, you may have noticed math.random returns a double. And if we want to convert it to an integer, we have to cast it to an int. To cast something, you just put it in parentheses and write int, or whatever you want to cast it to. And then, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so then is Boolean, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's not much else to go over, really. I think that's about it. If you have any questions, again, you just leave them in the comments. I'll be happy to answer them. Or if you're on my robotics team, you can just ask me in person. That'll probably work a lot better. Anyway, let's get to the exciting stuff. Again, I'm going to have this just pre-typed because honestly, because I'm sure you've been practicing on your own, maybe, if you're this interested in programming. If you've made it this far, hearing me ramble about how to not talk. Basically, you should have this nailed down. So what we're going to be talking about today is loops. Loops are useful if you want to run through the same segment of code over and over again until you want to stop, or maybe never stop in some cases. But for robots, they automatically are called. The methods are automatically called, like every few... don't remember what the exact amount of time is, but basically you don't have to worry about loops for making the robot run. Just for like normal functions. For example, the first kind of loop we're going to talk about is honestly the most useful one. For loops. Oh, you gotta type. You gotta type well. For loops. How for loops work is you define them to run a certain number of times. For example, you can do a double, but most of the time it's int I in the parentheses equals whatever you want to start at. We're going to start at 0, I guess. I is less than or equal to. You don't have to do the equal sign too. Whatever you want to stop at. I want to stop at 9 because then I'll run, 9 times, or it'll run 10 times actually. And then I plus plus. You may have seen this before in maybe this one. I didn't maybe go over it. No, okay, we're fine. I must have not gone over it in another. Don't worry about that. Basically, I plus plus is the same thing as I plus equals 1, or I equals I plus 1. These are all the same thing for the most part. So I plus plus will always add 1. It'll always update by 1. These you could update by 2 or 4 you want if you wanted to. I plus plus will always add 1. And if you do this plus plus I, it's really only useful for if you're printing them out. Basically, it means it'll update I, and like for example, if you're printing it out, it would update. You would see the updated version. Like it would print the updated version. Blah blah blah. With this one, it would print out I, then update it. But we're not printing stuff out, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay, so we got a for loop here, and it'll just run through a certain number of times. And there we go. There's a for loop. And then we can just say we want to print out high 10 times. Well, we can do that. And there we go. Printed out high should be 10 times. Yep. That's really all for loops are useful for. Well, they're useful for a lot of other stuff too, but I mean, you can do a lot more with them, but for now, that's all you have to really worry about. The next kind of loop is a while loop. A while loop is usually only used for when you want to run through something pretty much an endless number of times, or you have, say, a Boolean outside that updates at some point in the code. But robotics, you won't be using them a lot, really, because they're not too useful. So, yeah. You don't have to really worry about them too much. But just for sake of training purposes, while true, this will obviously run forever. It's what we call an infinite loop. An infinite loop is a loop that will just never ends. When it comes to robotics, if you make one of those, they are really frustrating to fix. So if you're in robotics, unless someone tells you that this has to be done with a while loop, in any other situation, do not use it, because it is frustrating to fix them. Because more often than not, you have to rewrite the whole segment of code that it was going to run through, because your logic only worked for a while loop. Basically, just don't use them, right? Unless you absolutely have to. But there's a lot of things that for loops can do that while loops can't. For example, let's say, there's a lot of things that in robotics that a for loop is a lot more useful for. But like, say, a while loop, you could have a counter. Let's say it starts at 0. And you say, well, counter is less than or equal to 9. And you have your code here. And then you update counter at the end. This is basically the same thing as that the for loop is accomplishing. It's just the for loop's doing it all in one line, which is a lot nicer. But the while loop is basically, they both have the same function. Just run through run through code a certain number of times and then be done. And then I think when we're talking about if statements, I mentioned break. Break is always useful if you wanted to say break out of this for loop. Like, for example, here, let me delete this while loop, otherwise it'll run forever. Well, it won't run forever in this case, but I'll just delete it anyway. I don't need it. I'm not gonna. Yeah, you'll see it only ran through once because it had that break. I don't think I'm gonna go over while loops too much because they're honestly not that useful. You don't really need to worry about them for the most part, at least not in my experiences. But let's see what we could do next. Do while loops, even more useless. So a do while loop basically accomplishes the same goal, just in a lot weirder of a way. So that would be a do while loop. If I could type it right. I don't type them that often, that's why. Okay, and then I have to put a semicolon at the end. A do while loop is pretty much the exact same thing as a while loop. It just has do at the beginning. And then basically the only difference is that it'll do code and then it'll test the condition to see if it's true. So that's the only real difference, but it's not that major of a one. Whew. All right. Next part, we're gonna go back to for loops because there's actually something really interesting you can do with for loops, and it's called nesting. If I could type, okay, send equal to, let's say for I plus plus. Okay, so we have this for loop. We can actually put another for loop in it, but we can't. So the thing with the for loop is that, so you see this int I here, that means that it's instantiated only for that for loop. But you notice that since this for loop is within it, it is also that int I exists. Anything inside these brackets, int I is already defined. outside of it, int I doesn't exist anymore. So we can't use int I again, as I'll show you. It'll say, it'll give us a problem. Oh, it'll give us a bunch of other problems. So basically, you can't use I again. So we're going to use j. J equals 0. J is less than or equal to I j plus plus. Cool. You can set this equal to anything. I could make it 8 or something like that, but I'm just gonna make it less than or equal to I. Okay. Oh, I'm breaking that. That's another thing you should get used to too. Is if you have a certain preference, same line, next line, try to stick with it and like don't change it through, because that's more frustrating than, well, not more frustrating than anything, but it's frustrating to just look at code that isn't formatted in the best way it could. So now we have this. What are we gonna do with it? Let's print out some stars. Let's say, because that's kind of the thing that I did when we started out in my computer science class. We just did that. Okay, but we don't want to print line. We want to just print. Okay, and then in this one, let's just print line. Or I can teach you something we haven't touched on yet. You can do system.out.print and then this. If you type a backslash, it's called an escape character, and there's a lot of them. The only one you'll probably be using is \n in this case, but there's other ones like \t or \/ if you want to access a backslash. Otherwise, you don't get anything. But this is an escape character. \n means that it'll create a new line. It works just like system.out.print line, but you could do it. For example, I could do it right here, and it would immediately make a new line. Or I could do it before, but basically acts as system.out.print line. All right, let's run this and see what it does. Oh, that's a nice pattern actually. So these are useful for if you want to make patterns, and you could even repeat this, but do the opposite. So we could do for int I equals 4 is greater than or equal to 0 I minus minus and j minus minus. Actually, we'll probably do j plus plus for that one. And we'll see what it produces. Oh, that's nice. It's got like a little half diamond, I guess, maybe. I don't know. Maybe we're playing The Sims or something like that, and it's the half plumb dot, but basically, I don't know. In nested for loops, you can accomplish really cool patterns. You'll notice that seems to be like a certain format that I used. Usually, your first for loop will be how many rows you have. For example, this runs through 5 times. I have 5 rows right here, and then this just dictates how many stars you print out on each line, or how many objects you print out on each line. That's pretty much it for nested for loops. So the next thing we're going to do is enhanced for loops. Maybe. Could we do this way? Actually, no, we're not going to. So let me just illustrate this for you. Maybe you should probably come back from a later video in this series, but let's say you don't know what this is yet. But I mean, I might as well go over it anyway because this is the loops video. So that means array. You don't have to worry about that for now. List. Basically, like I said, you don't have to worry about that. Enhanced for loop really is just if you want to run through a list of things, but like I said, you don't really have to worry about that. But I'll just show it to you just in case you do know what arrays are. You're coming in from a different point, but you want to watch the whole series. That would be how you set up an enhanced for loop. But like I said, you don't really have to worry about those. That's gonna be an issue because it's not initialized. Okay, don't worry about that though. Let's see, what else could I go over with for loops? Well, we could always turn into, oh yeah, you can see I'm just recorded those. For loop assignment. Yes, because this is always the best idea. Let me not be prepared for my videos. Like, oh, okay, let me go over that. Modulus. So, okay, this is gonna be weird to use this for some of you who've never heard of what modulus is. Basically, it gives you the remainder of something. For example, this is going to give me an error, but let's say we had 4 mod 2. What that really means is how many times does 2 go into 4, and what's the remainder? We care about the remainder. So let's see here. 2 can go into 4 2 times. 2 times 2 is 4. Okay, so 4 can go into 4, and then we get the remainder, which is 0. So that's nice. Basically, mod 2 is a good way of testing if something is an even number. If it has no remainder, then it's even. If it does, for example, if we had, say, 5 mod 2, the remainder would be 1 because, well, this can be in 2 times, 4. 5 minus 4 is 1. That's our remainder. So we know it's odd. That'll help you with one of the questions, I know for sure. But yeah, what you probably should go over is, I'd go over order operations, but honestly, I don't know them when it comes to adding modulus into the picture. So I'll try and see if I can find any resources, and I'll put it in the description. If I don't, well, RIP. But yeah, basically modulus is really good for testing things like, is 6 even? Yep, it's even. I mean, you could also just know that from, knowing your numbers, but it's really helpful if you are running through, say, a bunch of numbers and, well, you don't know the number just right off the top of your head because it's running through it. So like if you wanted to say, let's say, okay, for int I equals 0, I is less than 101, I plus plus. It goes everything from 0 to 100, and we want to print out just the even ones, which is why you can incorporate if statements. Aha! So now we can combine for loops and if statements, the power of 2 combined. Except for loop, I guess, is the superhero, and if is the sidekick, but they're both powerful, I guess. So we can do if I mod 2 equals 0. That's how we can test if something's even. And then we can just system.out.println. We'll print out I. And that'll give us the list of every even number from 0 to 100. That's pretty nice. And I mean, that's the power of the 2. You use the for loop to run through a series of numbers, and the if statement to just test for something. It's pretty useful. I mean, it's seriously all. Once you get into higher level programming, like here, like I'll give you an example. Pick game. Actually, that's not a good example. I don't have any good examples actually. But basically, just for loops and if statements combined, they can accomplish a lot. And honestly, that's probably what the majority of your code will look like for robotics. Is just for loops, if statements, and then methods called from other classes that we haven't talked about yet. And like I said, like that's literally the series is like referencing everything that we will talk about but haven't talked about yet. Because trust me, it's hard. It's hard to talk about introductory Java when I want to consider myself a pro at Java, but I would think I have a decent amount of experience, so it's hard for me to teach you, like, say, like declaring variables, because to me that's really basic. But I mean, I guess you gotta start somewhere. Let's see. What else could we go over? Other than that, I mean, just like for loops, honestly, you'll be using them a lot more than any other kind of loop, because like I said, while loops have the chance of more often than not ending in an infinite loop, and I'll actually even show you what an infinite loop looks like. So for example, if I run this, you'll notice it doesn't exit. And it lets me type characters. What? But this is using a scanner from the previous episode. How was that possible? And also you can see that scanner is still imported anyway. Well, it's because it's an infinite loop. And the only way to end this loop is to just terminate. And there you go. I also didn't delete that. Okay. And that's why you don't want to use while loops, because for loops are working with a for loop, it's a lot harder to get an infinite loop unless you just type something in wrong. So, but more often than not, you won't get an infinite loop. The only time you could get an infinite loop with a for loop is, say, if you had for int I equals 0, I is less than 1, I minus minus. That will give you an infinite loop. But you have to, like I said, you have to type that intentionally. And actually, no, I guess it's the terminate. Yep. So that's nice. But a while loop won't do that for you. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Which I guess is a good way of showing you if you ever need to open things again, you just, like from the first episode, you just go to Window, Show View, and then whatever you accidentally clicked on to remove. So, yeah. Think that's pretty much it for this episode. I don't know what else to talk about. So, if you have any questions about for loops, just post it in the comments below. And if you're on my robotics team, probably more convenient to just ask me in person. And that's pretty much it. The assignment will be in the description below. And thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.